Well, today this is indeed going to be a relatively short video. Now, I said that prior at the start of yesterday's video, and it ran on for almost 3/4 of an hour. But today's video, I think, will indeed be actually substantially smaller, shorter. Briefly, because after Sunday, which is of course Easter Sunday in most of the world, most of the Christian world, though not in Greece, Russia, Ukraine, or other Orthodox lands, we have less news to report today. In most countries that I know, certainly in Britain, today, by the way, Easter Monday, is a bank holiday, as we like to say in Britain. I actually object to the word bank holiday, but anyway, it is an official holiday, and I extend again my Easter greetings and my best wishes for Easter Monday to anybody who is celebrating this holiday, wherever you are. Anyway, as a result of the holiday, the result is that we're getting less news, but we are getting some. And of course, that news that we are getting is in its own way important. Now, I'm going to make a quick observation. A few weeks ago, at the end of March, when the Russian military withdrew from the areas around Kiev and Chernigov, in circumstances that we have analysed exhaustively here on this channel, and most specifically on the Duran, and also in particular in a mammoth live stream that we did with the wonderful Scott Ritter. Anyway, after that withdrawal, there was this brief period of euphoria, almost intoxicated euphoria in the West, and to some extent, I suspect, in Ukraine itself, with much of the media convinced that Ukraine was in some way winning the war. We have explained many times on the Duran, and I have explained many times in this channel, why this was a total understanding based on a failure to grasp the essentials of Russian strategy. Anyway, I'm starting to get the sense that that sense of euphoria has now dissipated, and that as the news trickles out of the Donbass, and of course out of Mariupol as well, where much of the most intense fighting has been happening, the sense of euphoria is now turning into concern and growing alarm. In Mariupol, the Azovstal steelworks continues now to be the subject of relentless bombing and shelling after the Ukrainian garrison there refused the Russian offer of a negotiated surrender. I wonder, by the way, how long that will continue for, and whether it really is the case that the fighters in the Azovstal steelworks will actually go on fighting to the very end. I say that because, briefly, the Russians claimed some days ago that the garrison in the Azovstal steelworks is now short of water and food. Food surprises me, actually. I would have thought that there'd be plenty of opportunities to build up large stocks of food and ammunition in the Azovstal steelworks. But water is, of course, another matter. Unless there's some connection to the water system somewhere, and I suspect the Russians will be busy trying to find out whether that is the case and whether this is so, in order to interrupt the water supply. But unless there is some connection to the water supply system, then of course water can be stored in tanks, and the total territory of the Azovstal steelworks is around apparently 1 square kilometre, so in theory there ought to be plenty of places to hide. I can't help but think that water is extremely difficult to store, takes up a lot of space. Consumption of water, one would suppose, by 1,500 to 2,000 or whatever it is, men is going to be intense, even if there are attempts made to ration the amount of water. And I would have thought that even without the Azovstal steelworks being stormed, problems of dehydration are going to start intensifying over the next couple of days, even if, as I said, there's no actual attempt to storm the steel plant. And of course, the Russians are continuing to shell the steel plant. They continue to bomb it. Heavy Tupolev bombers apparently have again been dropping heavy bombs on the steel plant. As I've said, I'm fairly sure that these are bunker buster type bombs. And one wonders whether men trapped underground, or underground, maybe not trapped, but finding themselves underground, subjected to this kind of shelling, presumably much of the time in the dark, and also starting to become thirsty and dehydrated, are going to be able to continue the struggle for quite as long as some people in the West appear to believe. Now, I say that, I would add that, of course, if they're running short of water, and if they're in darkness much of the time, and if they are cut off from the outside world, then disorientation and loss of connection to reality is also going to start to intensify, and there'll no doubt be all kinds of problems as well. So I'm not going to say what's going to happen at the Azovstal steelworks. I'm not an expert, but I wonder how much longer this situation there can realistically continue for. In the meantime, with Ukrainian troops now basically trapped in the Azovstal steelworks, and with the rest of the residential areas of Mariupol cleared, still apparently stragglers, some of them are trying to get through. There was another group of 150 that apparently tried to reach the steelworks a few days ago, but they were intercepted, and, well, I'm not going to try and speculate what happened to them. The Russians say that the grouping was destroyed. Anyway, it seems that the Russians feel able to sort of lighten the number of troops stationed on the perimeter of the Azovstal steelworks, and we are now starting to see serious deployments of Russian and militia, Donbass militia units and Chechen militia units to other parts of the front. Meanwhile, it seems further north, around Izium, there have been, what I have to say, come across to me as increasingly desperate attempts by the Ukrainians to try to push back the Russian forces, who are increasingly gaining ground around Izium. And there was some kind of encounter battle. From what I can glean, it was rather a small one. But anyway, the Ukrainians came off very badly. Several more of their armoured vehicles were destroyed. And this, by the way, increases the impression I'm getting that whilst Ukrainian troops can put up a determined resistance in built-up areas and in concrete bunkers and such things, in encounter battles on open country, they have no chance of defeating the Russians. Now, at this point, I'm going to provide a link to an extremely useful blog by the American ex-Marine and political commentator Jacob Dreisen. Now, I've actually used Jacob Dreisen's material in other programs, but until fairly recently, he wasn't publishing an open blog. He was providing private emails that he was circulating to people, and I'm a little reticent to publish information that is published in that exact way. But Jacob is now providing he's now actually publishing a proper blog, And I will say straight away that I think it's one of the best blogs around that I have seen about the situation in Ukraine, and in fact his commentary on the situation in Ukraine, and indeed also on the political uptake and understanding of events in Washington itself, has been consistently insightful and outstanding. And I would add further that Jacob Dreisen, who is, as I said, I understand he's served in the Marines, he served as a Marine. He is, in my opinion, the best analyst of films and photographs coming out of the conflict that I have seen. I'm not sure where he obtained this expertise, but frankly, when it comes to photographs and films, which, in spite of recent corrections to my eyes, perhaps I'm not anyway able to see especially well, and besides, I'm not in any way the best person to analyze pictures and photographs. Anyway, Jacob Dreisen does this outstandingly well. And I have to say, they give perhaps the most vivid picture, these pictures and photographs, of what's actually happening in Donbass. And he's made a number of points on the latest entry in his blog, and he speaks about the situation in Izium. And specifically, he says that there's an unstoppable Russian blob slowly eating its way down from Izium. In other words, that this major Russian formation in and around Izium is steadily growing in size, and as it grows, it destroys more and more Ukrainian troops, which the Ukrainians are desperately trying to throw at it in order to try and slow down its advance. And he says that the Russians are now taking a very slow, cautious, methodical approach, with large forces still redeploying or in reserve. Russia is slowly advancing south and southeast of Izium. The goal appears to be to draw out and destroy as much Ukrainian human and material strength as possible, rather than quickly taking territory. On this front alone, tens of Ukrainians are being killed or taken prisoner every single day. There is quite a bit of photo, video evidence, and it's probably just the tip of the iceberg. Russia also takes losses, but these are nowhere near comparable. It is apparent that Ukrainians in this area are increasingly reservists who are, for the most part, motivated but not well trained or led. It is becoming clear that Ukraine has no more career military men in available ground maneuver units to plug its various holes with. Well, I have to say that this conforms with my own overall assessment of the whole Russian strategy throughout the war. As I have repeatedly said, as we've discussed on the Duran as well, the primary Russian objective is not to take territory as quickly as possible. It is to pursue the Clausewitzian objective of destroying the enemy's army, of grinding it down piece by piece in Donbass, encircling it, cutting off its prospects of resupply, drawing relief units into desperate counterattacks which can be destroyed piecemeal. The ultimate objective is to destroy Ukrainian forces in Donbass, in eastern Ukraine, in a way that will ultimately cause the entire Ukrainian defense to collapse, obviously in eastern Ukraine, but ultimately perhaps across the entire extent of Ukraine itself. To repeat again something that Alex Christoforou and I said in one of the titles of one of our live streams, the objective is not to take cities, it is to destroy armies. That is the Russian way of war. And that is what we'll be seeing being carried out methodically, incrementally in Donbass. And I come back to that report that I made yesterday, that between the start of operations on the 24th of February right up until the 25th of March, according to Colonel General Rudskoy of the Russian General Staff, Ukraine had suffered 14,000 so-called irreplaceable losses, which looks like being dead and severely wounded. And the Russian Ministry of Defense said on Saturday that to that has now been added a further 10,000 on top of that, bringing Ukrainian irreplaceable losses now to 24,000. Now that is an enormous rate of loss for an army the size of Ukraine's, which the Russians put, and I say army, I mean the totality of the Ukrainian armed forces. The Russians put that figure at around 250,000 at the start of the war. So that's around 10% of Ukrainians' manpower that has been ground down, placed out of action, destroyed, if you will, since the start of the fighting 54 or whatever it was days ago. That is an extraordinarily high rate of loss. Now, of course, just to repeat, this is based on Russian figures. Ukrainian figures are completely different. They put their losses far lower at just 3,000. But as I discussed in my program yesterday, Ukrainian losses in Mariupol alone show that the Ukrainian loss figures that the Ukrainians are providing simply cannot be true. And besides, there are other reasons, including the analysis of photographs done by people like Jacob Dreisen. There are more reasons for thinking that it is the Russian figures that are closer to being the correct ones. So that gives us a sense of what is actually happening. And by the way, again, I'm not going to discuss the exact movements of troops and how fast the Russians are moving in one place or another. But it does seem that, in fact, there are steady incremental advances all around the area of the so-called cauldron as gradually the Russians close in, taking territory, taking positions step by step, drawing in more reserves, replacing tired troops with fresh ones when they have to. And, of course, over and above and beyond that, they have air supremacy, as they call it. The Ukrainians have been trying to challenge this over Izium, but apparently they've been losing more aircraft over Izium. And of course, the Russians are able to strike everywhere across Ukraine, and they're doing so at an intensifying level. And if you think this is just my own analysis, we've now had some comments from the Austrian Chancellor, Mr. Nehammer, who of course is the one person amongst Western leaders who's actually met Vladimir Putin. He actually visited Moscow, had a meeting with Putin, and he's come away with his impressions of that meeting. And of course he said many things. Mr. Nehammer has said many things about that visit, which I've discussed in previous videos, but he's now disclosed something else, which is that over the course of his conversations with Putin, he got the impression, first, that Putin is extremely well informed about the situation in Ukraine. About that, I have no doubt. And secondly, that Putin believes that he is winning. And I am sure that Nehammer is right about that. And as I've said, all the information on the ground rather supports this. Now, anyway, that, it seems to me, is the overall situation on the ground in Ukraine. If you want to find a website which, as I said, looks at things from an American perspective, which I consider to be a good website, which is written by somebody who seems to be able to, I think Jacob Dreisen has knowledge of both Russian and Ukrainian, but I may be wrong there. But anyway, somebody who's able to look at the photographic evidence analysed the photographic and the video evidence, as far as I can see, accurately, and he's also, by the way, able to compare Russian and Ukrainian statements. Well, Jacob Dreisen's blog is a good place to go. There are lots of other places that I go to review what's going on. Most of these are Russian or Ukrainian, and as I discussed in my previous video, I don't provide links to those. But Jacob Dreisen's is American. He's an American patriot. He discusses the situation, I think, in a very, very good way. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say about the situation in the war. Elsewhere, it's now becoming increasingly clear in the West that we are looking at an increasingly disastrous economic picture. Inflation now is universally expected to reach double figures. Of course, in the Netherlands, officially it already has, but the probability is it already has in most of the West as well. But nobody seems to be in any doubts about this. And this morning, as I went on to the Financial Times being, of course, one of the most Ukrainian media outlets you can find in Britain. I have to say, by the way, that it's difficult to compare because they're all pro-Ukrainian to a greater or lesser extent. Most of them, well, none of them to any lesser extent, but the Financial Times is so to a very great extent. Anyway, the Financial Times was talking this morning, its major headline was about how stagflation is now in prospect and how the recovery from the pandemic is coming to an end. And of course, there's more and more concerns about the crisis in the global south, the food crisis in the global south. And I gather, now this I can't confirm, I haven't seen it, but apparently President Macron of France, who's of course in the process of campaigning for re-election, made what I thought, if it's accurately published, and I haven't actually seen the original, he made a rather, I thought, dangerous admission that up to 60 million refugees might be coming to Europe from Africa and from other places in the global south because of the crisis there. Now, I want to stress, I've seen that second and third hand. Maybe I'm getting Macron's words wrong, but I suspect he did say something about accelerated refugee flows to Europe from the global south. What bewilders me and what really saddens me is that much has been written, a great deal has been said about how for the Russians supposedly this is a war of choice. But the same applies to an enormous extent to us in the West as well. Just to repeat again, all of this could have been avoided if the Western powers just weeks ago had been prepared to do two things. First, to say that Ukraine would never join NATO. That's what they were all saying privately to each other. That's what, according to President Zelensky of Ukraine, they were telling the Ukrainians. They could have said that to the Russians. They could have agreed it in a document, and that would have diffused a large part of the crisis. And the second thing they could have done is that they could have told the Ukrainians that the time had finally come to press forward with a settlement of the crisis in Ukraine through the full implementation of the Minsk agreement, and that this required Ukraine to sit down and talk with the leaders of the two republics of the Donbass, the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republic, and to agree the various provisions of the Minsk agreement confirmed in a UN Security Council resolution and therefore part of international law, requiring Ukraine to grant autonomy to this region, agree to a new constitution, and new elections following negotiations with the leaders of the Donbass. I mean, it seems astonishing that we've got ourselves into this situation because we weren't prepared to do those two simple things, which did not materially affect the situation of the West. When future historians come back and look at this, they will be amazed. Thousands, probably tens of thousands of people are dying in Ukraine. The country is being systematically destroyed. There's growing evidence of a secessionist movement gathering force, no doubt with Russian encouragement, in Kherson region and in Zaporozhye regions. And so Ukraine looks like almost certain to lose even more territory soon, and probably it will soon lose more territory still. And of course, it might not even survive. And the West has inflicted extraordinary global suffering on the world and a catastrophic collapse in its own living standards. Was a refusal to talk about NATO's open door and to sabotage the Minsk agreement worth it? Well, I hardly think so, but that's where we are. Well, thank you for joining me today for this program. I look forward to you joining me in future programs on this channel and on our main channel, the Duran. Remember, you can find us on Rumble and Locals, as I said at the start of this program, but you can also find us on plenty of other platforms as well. Links under this video. You can also support us via Patreon and Subscribestar. Don't forget to check out our shop. The marvelous things that you will find there are magic mugs, our hats, our hoodies, our t-shirts, all those great things. And of course, last but not least, if you've liked this video, please remember to tick the like button and to check your subscription to this channel. That's enough for me today. Thank you for joining me once again, and have a very good day.